It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander, and we are back for week 2 of First LB1 Millzy Brews episodes, and I cannot say how excited I am for this episode. Every set, there's always a commander or two that get me really interested personally in brewing. I'm always interested, of course, in brewing for the channel and making decks for you guys. But there's always a one or two commanders that really get me going personally. And the one thing that I've been trying to brew for a long time is an Abzan kind of a tokens aristocrat style deck, but really something where I can marry the tokens and the aristocrats together to make an interesting deck profile. Now, we saw the pre-con get announced a while back. We saw the packaging, and it was called Corrupting Influence. And I was kind of intrigued because I thought, okay, well, this means it's probably some sort of Phyrexian Infect deck, and I was like, okay, well, that doesn't really interest me as much as Infect's cool. I run Triumph in some of my green decks. I mean, I have Jetmir, and it's a tokens deck, and I can just run Triumph in that if I want to kill somebody with Infect, if I'm 100% honest. So to be honest, the idea of Corrupting Influence didn't really interest me. But then, we saw Phyrexian LB1, and we see all these new cards that care about tokens. And I was like, okay. And I saw that these 1/1 might tokens with Toxic 1 was something in the set. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, that's something that could be interesting, go wide. But you aren't just going wide and taking people out. You have the chance of taking people out with poison, and it's kind of double-edged sword of doing that. But I was like, okay, well, we'd have to see a good commander. And I think we got probably the best commander we could ask for both, and that's Vishgraz the Doomhive, 2 white, black, green for a 3/3 Phyrexian insect. Menace Toxic 1, so whenever it deals combat damage to a player player also gets poison counter, so no longer are we just dealing damage in infect and poison counters. We're doing damage and getting a poison counter. Now Vishgraz only has Toxic 1. It says whenever it enters a battlefield, we create 3 1/1 Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. And then it gets +1/+1 counter for each poison counter opponents control. So when I saw Vishgraz, I said, okay, we already have a lot of cards in the set that care about making these 1/1 mites, and there's plenty of ways we can do that. We'll go through some of the ways we can make the mites. But I think the important thing about Vishgraz is it makes it when it enters the battlefield. And I think there's plenty of ways to do that. The easy ones I can think of, we'll talk about, are just simple cards that will blink or blink spells or things like that will get us more mites. But I think when you think about the amount of token doublers, the amount of token production things we have in the set, the new ways we got to play with tokens, and some of the ways we can sacrifice tokens, whether it be for mana or different things, I think there's a lot of things we can do with these tokens instead of just poisoning our opponents out to kind of make good value. I think the goal of the deck is to eventually poison our opponents out. I think that's kind of the way we're going to win most of the time. But I think our opponents can also turn down the threat of 20 or 30 might tokens that we pumped up to 3/3 or 4/4s, swinging at them not being relevant, right? So this brew right here that we're going to go over is a personal brew that I did for something I'm going to test. So I'm using a few cards that I wouldn't normally use in an episode of Millzy Brews. I've been trying to keep the Millzy Brews down on the budget as much as possible. This is a deck I'm throwing the budget kind of out of the window. I have my stable binder. I have a lot of things that I normally brew with. And so I've built this deck to be a 1.0 list to test for me. So if you're interested, I'd love to hear your opinion down in the comments on what you think of this Vishgraz list. Do you think I've accomplished what I'm trying to accomplish? I'm going to go through and explain my thought process on different cards, and then we'll go from there. Deck lists will be down in the description if you're interested, but let's get into it. So I always like to start with the lands because I think land bases are really important. I'm trying a couple new cards for XLB1 that I think are going to end up being pretty important. The one thing that I realized very quickly building this deck is almost all of my cards are Phyrexian. So I get to run Cavernous Souls, and I get to run Mirix. This is the new card from Phyrexian LB1. It taps for any color if it came in this turn, but for 3 and a tap, we can make a might token with Toxic 1. That's not a bad idea. I mean, we don't want to be always paying that, but it's something we can do. We get to play Path of Ancestry, right? Because not only is it a tri-land that was going to tap for any of our colors anyway with Vishgraz, but it's also going to scratch one because, again, most of our creatures are Phyrexian, but the big one that I didn't think about until I realized that most of the deck was going to be Phyrexian was the Seed Core. This is one of the new Sphere lands. This is Adamant of any color, spend this mana to only cast Phyrexian spells, creature spells, and then you can tap to give a 1/1 +2/+1. Only if an opponent's 3 or more, so corrupted and +1. And then Mycosynth Gardens is a new land that's been flying around. I kind of like the look of this one because we can copy things like Conjurer's Closet with it. But we will talk in a second about what artifacts we have in the deck. But Mycosynth Gardens for X and tap can become a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X. There's a lot of really great artifacts in this deck that can help us out. So I think the Mycosynth Gardens could come in a lot of handy. It does filter for a mana, so sometimes that can be a downside. But I think more often than not that third ability, if we copy the right artifact at the right time, I really feel like we're going to end up doing a lot of good. Urza Saga is going to go get us something we want. And then Inkmoth Nexus is going to turn into a 1 with Infect if we can pump it up or do something to it. I think it's just going to end up making a good go at the game. All right, let's get into our enchantments. And we're running a lot of them because we're playing a tokens deck. So tokens deck traditionally play a lot of enchantments because they tend to help either pump our tokens or do different things. Let's go through the enchantments I chose and let's talk about Annoying Procession. Just straight double the amount of tokens we make. So with Annoying Procession out, Vishgraz coming in is going to make us 6 1/1s instead of 3. Bash Remembrance, whatever creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life and we gains a life. This is going to make it so anytime one of our mites attack, our opponents have to kind of double think about blocking it, because if they just block it and take it out, they lose a life, we gain a life. Everyone loses a life, and we gain a life for each one of those. If I swing with 10 and all 10 of them die, we have a 10-point life swing that goes on there, and that becomes pretty important. Beastmaster Ascension, we have to end the game eventually, and Beastmaster Ascension is going to do that just by raw power overloading our opponents, getting them out of the way. Cover of Darkness, a very pricey card, but I think it fits really well here. It comes down, we pick Phyrexian, gives all of our Phyrexian creatures Sphere, which means they can't be blocked except by artifact creatures or black creatures. The good part about this is it's going to stop most decks from being able to block us effectively. We're not going to be able to get around these, Phyrexian Thopter decks, but I'm willing to take the exchange most of the time there because I think we're going to end up hitting over them because we're playing things like Intangible Virtue and Beastmaster Ascension and things like that. I also think we're just going to outwide most of those decks anyway, so I'm not as worried about the blocking decisions there. And in black, the only decks we're really worried about would be zombies. But I think, again, I really think this deck is just going to outproduce them in tokens, and so I don't think we're going to have to worry about that. Cryptolith Rite, letting all of our creatures tap for mana, especially our tokens. Now, this doesn't let the tapping for mana doesn't get around haste, so of course our tokens entering that turn aren't going to be able to tap for mana. But what I like about Cryptolith Rite is this is going to let us push our mana into other things. Our creatures tap for mana into other things, make them really useful. We're playing 2 more token doublers in Doubling Season and Parallel Lives. We want to get Vishgraz doubling tokens as quickly as possible. Vishgraz is our commander for a reason, so we want to make sure that we have these things done. If I have Parallel Lives, Doubling Season, or Annoying Procession in my hand, my goal is to get them down before Vishgraz. Set up as much as possible, get them down beforehand. Far Traveler. This is one of our many blink cards in the deck. It says that commander creatures you control have at the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target tap creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is great because we can use this to untap, kind of exile and bring back and untap another creature you control. Or we can do it to Vishgraz, untap it as long as it attacked, slam it back down. Now it's untapped. It's ready to go. It gives us more tokens because it came back in and it mines that value. The other one's Teleportation Circle. Exile up to 1 target artifact or creature we control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Again, just blink Vishgraz. It comes back in, gets us more tokens, and does other good stuff. Garruk's Uprising, mainly here for the trample. The bigger we make our tokens, the more we want them to trample through, not because of the toxic, just because eventually we're just going to hopefully raw damage our opponents out and win either by the toxic or by just raw damaging our opponents out. Enchanted Virtue +1/+1 and Vigilance. Now all of our tokens don't have to tap. Yes, they can't block, but I still think it's more than worth it to give them Vigilance because we could attack and use Cryptolith Rite or something like that to tap them for mana. Mirari's Wake, flat +1/+1 to the whole board, doubles all the mana we're going to produce. Necrogen Communion's an interesting card, and I think this is in here mainly for Vishgraz. Although he already has a copy of Toxic 1, my understanding of how this would work is he would have Toxic 1 and Toxic 2, so every time he took damage, he would put 3 poison counters on an opponent instead of just one. But I'm really looking at the bottom clause. Whenever enchanted creature dies, return that creature to the battlefield under your control. This is just going to help us, one, get another ETB trigger off of Vishgraz, and then two, bring him back without having to put him back in the command zone. Because remember, every time he goes back into the command zone, it's going to get more and more and more and more expensive to bring it back out. Pheresis, just giving a creature infect. I think this is a great way to end the game at some point and help us out. Whether it's putting on Vishgraz, since he's going to get pumped up by all the poison counters our opponents are going to have, or just putting on a couple of the big creatures we have in the deck and just letting them hit through the natural way to end up the game. Skrulv's Hive, we get a little Bitter Blossom, this time in white, and it gives us might tokens. But I think the big part of this card is the bottom half, which is that as long as your opponent has three or more, a opponent has three or more poison counters, all of our creatures with Toxic gets lifelink, and we're playing some pretty good creatures in here with Toxic. We'll get to that in a second when we get up top. So all of our 1/1s have lifelink, which that life is going to stack up very quickly as far as if we're attacking with enough of them. And then it may not be a big deal to not be able to block if we're getting that much life. Smothering Tithe help us with that mana. Sylvan Library help us get into these teleportation circles, these far travelers, these doublers. We want to get into them as soon as possible, get our game plan moving. We talked about the teleportation circle. And then Meat Hook. Meat Hook is mainly here is one, it could be a finisher if we have enough might tokens. This is whenever a creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life. If we have enough might tokens, that's not a stack. That's a triggered ability that's going to be pretty hard to get around. But the other thing is mainly just if we get this down for anything and then keep it down, anytime a creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life. So this plus a Bastion Remembrance plus just swinging at our opponents means anytime one of our creatures die, they lose two and we gain one. But it's really that incremental one life each time one of our creatures dies, whether we sacrifice it to our own ability or they get rid of it. It's going to kind of do that Aristocrats burn across the day. So one of the big things that I'm putting in here for the Aristocrats are the Phyrexian Altar and the Ashnod's Altar, because they both work with Bastion Remembrance to kind of give us that value. We're not playing a ton of cards that we can like dump a ton of mana into, but I think the important thing here is with I think just Nim Deathmantle and Ashnod's Altar, we can go infinite on getting Vishgraz to get us infinite tokens, or go almost near infinite. Nim's Deathmantle says it gets +2/+2. It has Intimidate and it's a black zombie. Whenever a non-token creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4 if you do return that creature to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. So what we would do is Vishgraz, we need literally any number of tokens, but really truly we just need one creature besides Vishgraz to start. We would sacrifice both of them to Ashnod's Altar, netting us 4 colorless mana. We would need Nim Deathmantle to be attached to Vishgraz to start, I believe, but I guess you wouldn't technically need it to. You would just need it on the battlefield. Those two would go to the graveyard. Because Vishgraz went to the battlefield, Nim's Deathmantle would go off. We would pay the 4 mana from Ashnod's Altar, bring Vishgraz back to the battlefield, and get the Nim Deathmantle on it. Vishgraz would trigger, giving us 3 more 1/1 tokens. What we would then do is just, again, sacrifice one of those tokens we just made, Vishgraz to the Ashnod's Altar, set them aside. 4 mana is floating, Nim Deathmantle goes off, and again, we could repeat that process for as many tokens as we want to, and then with a Bastion Remembrance or with a Meat Hook Massacre on the field, we would actually just drain all our opponents out after about 20 loops of that, because even if they were at a full 40, 2 creatures dying every time, if we have one of them on the battlefield, that's 2 damage each time, and we would just kill our opponents that way. Or there's plenty of other ways we can do that as well. So this is just one of those ways where we can kind of work in some extra ways to win the game, rather than just attacking. And I think, the one thing to remember when you're building commander decks is if you want to get up on the higher power level, not CDH, I just mean the higher level of normal commander, you need combos to end the game eventually. Sure, my Jetmir deck tends to end the game by just combat, because it's very good at doing that. It's built to do that, but I don't think every time you play this game, a game with this deck, you're going to win by poison. I think we need to build kind of other play lines to end the game, so that we make sure to do that. Now, we don't have access to red, so I can't put like an Impact Tremors or a Perforos in here to help me end the game by just blinking Vishgraz. So that's a little bit different. We need to find some other ways to win. But we have a Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, mana production. We're playing the Glistening Sphere from the precon. This one's pretty cool. It enters battlefield tap. When it comes in, we proliferate, so we just can add an extra counter to anybody who has a poison counter. Taps for a mana, and then as soon as one of our opponents has 3 more poison counters, it taps for 3 mana of any one color. And that's going to be a nice little spike for us to get some things out. Conjurer's Closet, end of the beginning of the end step. Exile target creature we control and put them back under our control. My understanding is if we have both Conjurer's Closet and Teleportation Circle on the battlefield, we should be able to blink Vishgraz both to the same ones. The only question there for me is because if you have to set the trigger if you have to set the target when you put it on the stack, then it wouldn't work that way. But there are plenty of other creatures in our deck that we could blink just if we had to. But if it does work that way, that's great. We would get a double blink. Same thing with Far Traveler. But if it doesn't, we would just pick some other creatures and blink them. I don't think we lose anything out. But they're all in here mainly because we're never going to see all 3 of them probably in a game unless we search for them, but we want to make sure we can find one of them. Grafted Exoskeleton, +2/+1 infect to a creature, and then whenever that creature becomes, whenever it comes unattached to a permanent, sacrifice that permanent. I think this is just in here again. Throw it on Vishgraz if we want to help end the game with some infect damage. We could throw this on a couple of the other big creatures we have. This is just here to kind of help spread the love, give our opponents the poison counters we want to get the poison counters, and kind of manipulate where we need them to be. And then Skull Clamp, one of our Aristocrat staples. We're making a lot of 1/1 mites that probably aren't going to be pumped up unless we find an intangible virtue or something like that. So the Skull Clamp will allow us to draw off of those mites and get us what we need as far as that goes. All right, let's get into the spells. And I think the one reason I want this deck in Abzan is because we get a cross-section of 3 of the best things in this color combination. 1, the best ramp. We have green, which means we have all of the beautiful green ramp. 2, black. We have access to some of the single best tutors in the game paired with green and white, who give us the access to the other tutors we need in the game. And then removal. We have access to some of the single best removal in these 3 colors, and we get to play it and take major advantage of it. So, as far as the sorceries go, Cultivate, Farseek, Kanama's Reach, Nature's Lore, Rampant Growth, 3 visits. We don't want to have any problems on mana. Our commander's 5 mana, and we're not we're not in a non-green deck, so we're not playing a ton of mana effects. We are relying on the ramp and our other things, and we want to see it quickly. D-Tutor, Idyllic Tutor as far as sorceries go. D-Tutor can go get anything. Idyllic Tutor can go get us an enchantment, and most of the things we care about in the deck are enchantments. So Idyllic Tutor is great for that. Triumph for the Horde's just going to help us end the game if we have enough tokens and we want to end the game that way. Freeze's Outbreak just seems like a really fun board way. Each opponent gets a poison counter, and then each creature your opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each poison counter that its controller has. Of course, the maximum would be 9, right? Because as soon as they get that 10th poison counter, they're just dead even before this spell resolves. But I think the higher we can spread out our counters, and the better it is. But for example, if I don't have a Freeze's Outbreak in my hand, I'm not going to spread them out. I think poison decks still want to just knock out one opponent at a time, or at least get everybody to the corrupted threshold and then knock anybody out. I'm sure there's different ways we can do this, but I think as long as you can get 4 or 5 counters on each player or around that, I think Outbreak is just as good as a Toxic Deluge, or just as good as a flat board wipe, because it's going to get around indestructible, it gets around targeting, it just knocks everything out, and we're kind of proliferating, but not necessarily, because we're not necessarily getting a token on everything else. We're just getting a poison counter on all our components. This is worst case scenario a way to get a poison counter on everybody, but just giving them 1 and then giving everyone -1/-1 feels kind of rough for 3 mana, but it is a thing you could do. And then one of my favorite new cards in White Sun's Twilight. This is a Martial Coup, but instead of just giving us soldier tokens, this gives us the 1/1 mites we already want, gains us X life, and then destroys all other creatures. And we have a couple instants in this deck that are going to give all of our creatures indestructible. So what we could do is White Sun's Twilight and then respond with our own indestructible spell, and nuke all of our opponents, get a bunch of 1/1s out of the process, and just net and probably win the game at that point. Okay, instance. Anguished on Making Assassin's Trophy, part of our removal suite. Both of these are really great removal spells in their own right for the things that they do. Swords to Plowshares, again, another piece of removal, and Path to Exile. Those are our single target removals. Heavily considered Deadly Rollick. I just couldn't fit it in, and I thought I wanted to keep the cheap removal up because I'm willing to take the downside on these to have them available and ready to go. Clever Concealment, one of my favorite new cards from this set that came out, because I think it's just going to end up being the thing that probably protects us more often than not. Convoke, so any number of our creatures can tap to help us out. The only bad part about Clever Concealment is all of our whites are colorless, so we will need some white creatures or some white mana left up, but any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. And the great part about phasing out is we don't lose the tokens, because the tokens aren't considered to leave the battlefield. So we can just phase all of our tokens out, and at the start of our turn, they've all phased back in, and we're ready to use them. No blinking, and like they don't leave the battlefield, so we don't get Vishgraz's ability again. But I think it's a great protection for our board. E-Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, and Worldly Tutor. Some more search, tutor for anything, vamp for anything, worldly tutor for creatures, enlightened tutor for artifacts or enchantments, and that becomes pretty important because we can go get the Conjurer's Closet, we can go get any number of things. Ephemerate, exiling a creature and bringing it back. This is more often than not going to target Vishgraz, and then at the start of our turn, next upkeep, we get to do it again, and that's great because that gives us more things. Flawless Maneuver, Grand Crescendo, more indestructibility for our tokens. This could protect us in combat. This could protect us from board wipes. Flawless Maneuver, as long as we have Vishgraz, it's free, giving all of our creatures indestructible. And then Grand Crescendo, if we wanted to dump this in here to get some more tokens, we could, to use them as sack fodder for mana, that kind of thing, we could do that. But mainly it's in here for the creatures you control gain indestructible for a turn. Noxious Revival did get a reprint in the precon, so I think it's more than worth it to slam it in here. For 2 life, you can just get a card from your graveyard and put it back on top. That's pretty great, so we can reuse some cards or get some things that got hit out. Tainted Strike, I feel like is going to become, more than worth it eventually. This is something that could help us sneak some extra counters onto somebody. Something gets unblocked and only has toxic 1 or 2, let's say, and our opponent's not that worried about, bam, you give it an infect out of nowhere, and it might be able to take somebody out. And I think it's worth a black mana to hold it in your hand and potentially use it somewhere else. Yes, I agree that Pheresis and Grafted Exoskeleton are better cards. I just think that Tainted Strike's worth the slot, and maybe worst case scenario, it comes out for another removal spell. And now we get to the portion of the deck that I think looks really fun, and I think these are the pieces that are going to come together and probably make the deck really shine the way we want it to, and that's our creatures. First off, Champion Lambhold. One of the only non-Phyrexian cards in our deck, but it's a win con for us. Creatures with powers less than Champion Lambhold cannot block creatures you control. And it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambhold. Well, the cool part about this is if we're playing a lot of decks that have really small creatures, all we gotta do is blink Vishgraz once on our turn somehow, or do a lot of other things, or pump Champion of Lambhold up somehow to be 4 or 5, and then most of your average creatures or tokens aren't going to be able to block us, and then we might be able to just make our army go through and win the game just on Champion Lambhold alone. We need it to be down for 1 or 2 turns, or even just 1, and if we can get enough creatures in the battlefield, or we can double, if we have this and a token doubler out and we blink Vishgraz once, now this is a 7/7, and now almost nothing is going to be able to block our team. So I think Champion Lambhold's one of those cards that's probably just going to lead to a win more type of atmosphere. Contaminated Grafter, it looks really big, but I think this is pretty cool. Trample Toxic 1, whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to 1 or more players, proliferate. Unfortunately, the proliferate's only going to come off once, which kind of stinks, but I think it's well worth the 5 mana. And then at the end of it, at the beginning of your end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, draw a card, then put a land from my hand on the battlefield. It just gives a little bit of ramp. I wish it didn't say 1 or more players. I wish it said whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player to proliferate, because then we could potentially get 3 proliferates in the course of a combat. But I still think Grafter is going to do us enough good with a combination of those 2 abilities to kind of be a net positive for the card. Alice Norn, Mommy of Machines, permanent enters the battlefield, double it. So this is going to double Vishgraz as well every time it comes in. And then we get to basically shut off all our opponent's ETBs. This card is crazy expensive at the moment, and I don't think it's going to come down. So this may be the one card I pull out just on cost alone, because it's great, right? With Vishgraz, it's literally doing everything Vishgraz wants us to do, and it's a great 4/7 body that we could put that grafted exoskeleton or put that Freesis on, and it's going to be hard to deal with. But the card's going for insane money right now, even for just the standard version. So I think of all the cards in this deck that are going to be tough to get, I feel like it's going to be that one. Might Overseer. This is one of the Jumpstart cards, I believe. From the set, as long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+1 at first strike. This is great because this is going to make our mites even harder to block. And then for 3 and a Phyrexian white, we can just make a token. I doubt we'll ever run into a scenario where we have so much mana to make those tokens. But the scenario I could see, in my head, if we get into a later portion of the game, if we have a ton of tokens, an Ashnod Altar, and a token doubler, well, you could sacrifice a token to the Ashnod's Altar, or 2 tokens or whatever, pay the life, and then spit out 2 or 4. There's plenty of scenarios where, depending on how many doublers out, we could make tokens at a decent rate, or we could just dump all the mana we have into it. Might Overseer, I think, is more important for the fact that it has first strike, and then it gives all of our tokens first strike, and we could always throw the Grafted Exoskeleton or the Freesis on this as well. Mondrak, one of my favorite new cards from the set. This is not only going in Vishgraz, but going in almost every token deck I control. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice as many get created instead. We have an Anointed Procession on a creature. For 3 mana, we can give it indestructible. This is perfect because then we can protect it from literally everything but Cyclonic Rift and Mass and single target exile removal. And for the 4 life and 1 mana, I think that's plenty worth it if it's going to continue to double our tokens over a couple turns. Necrogen Rot Priest. This card may look like it's kind of dumb. It's an uncommon from the set. People are probably like, oh, well, it's a 1/5 for 4 mana. That's not a lot. But when you read its ability, I think it's more than worth it for a deck. Whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter. So every single one of our mites that hits a player with this Rot Priest out gets 2 instead of 1. And if you think about it that way, we don't need that many to connect. And listen, mites just have 1. When you start talking about Tyrannix Rex or some other creatures that have a higher toxic count, or if we give something in fact, you got to remember that it has toxic. Okay, so it would just work on the mites, but I still think that's more than worth it. And we can give a creature with Death Touch. But I think this is going to be one of those cards that's going to be a win more with the mites, make them hit harder, make them do more with the poison counters. Norn's Choirmaster, flying in first strike, so it comes down and can do some good things in the air. Again, this is another Freesis target. This is another grafted exoskeleton target. But it says whenever a commander you control enters the battlefield or attacks, proliferate. So the cool part here is Vishgraz comes in and our poison and this is out, or every time we blink Vishgraz while this is out, we're just going to start proliferating. And if we can blink it enough times, I mean, that could end the game right there. Just blinking it and doing things like that. So Phyrexian Swarmlord, at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 insect creature token with infect for each poison counter your opponents have. I think this is one of those cards that just it's a great target for some trample like with Garruk's Uprising, because it has infect, which is going to help us get those counters on. But I think in all reality, this is just going to help us make more 1/1 tokens. Now, these aren't the mites. They don't have toxics. They don't get the benefit from things like Rot Priest. But I think they're just another thing, another token, and another token that could get doubled by any of our sources that our opponents have to deal with now extra than what they had to deal with before. And again, if we're going to be good at any one thing, it's going to be swarming, going wide, and hitting our opponents. Okay, Rhea Ivor, Bane of Blanehold is a card that I'm going to die on the hill right now in this video. And if I'm right and this card works, I'm going to dump this down in the comments and gloat over it. But if I'm not right, hey, I've been not right before. This card is going to be a very good card in this deck because Vishgraz has a toxic 1, which means no matter how much damage Vishgraz deals to a player, we're only going to get 1 poison counter. I'd say if that damage is 5 or 6, it may just be worth putting this on Vishgraz. I'd even argue at 9 or 10, if you have a decent hold on the board, yes, it's commander damage, and you have to consider that. But its ability at the beginning of combat during your turn, the next time target creature would deal combat damage to one or more players this combat, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented, create that many 1/1 mites. We have so many ways to double, or we're going to have ways to double it we're going to find very quickly. Because let's be 100% honest, if I have a tutor in my opening hand that can get Annoying Procession, Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Mondrak, I'm going to get them. We're not going to wait. It's one of the most important things in our decks. We're probably almost always going to have them, or we're going to draw on a way of having them. If you think about this, if Vishgraz is a 5/5, let's say only a couple of our opponents have a poison counter. I picked Vishgraz. It has Menace, which means depending on the player we attack or depending on the situation, we could have it hit somebody. Well, instead of doing 5, now we're getting 10 1/1 mites that we can either use for mana, we can use them for a lot of things. I think Reavor in this deck especially is going to end up netting us a ton of value on mite tokens, and I'm waiting to get proved wrong, but I really think this card's going to work. And like I said, I'll report down in the comments what I find. I'm going to test this deck a bunch in the next upcoming weeks. I'm going to buy the pre-con and I'll end up filling in some of the deck. But I have a gut feeling this card is going to do a lot in this deck, and I am happy to see it work if it does work the way I want it to. Skrelv, Defector Mite. I think I really just want it for that last ability, giving Vishgraz protection from a color. So if we give it Toxic One again, it would just have two things of Toxic One. But it has Hexproof from that color and can't be blocked by creatures of that color. Well, let's say we have an opponent who's playing goblins or something like that. We pick that color, send Vishgraz that way, and then we're going to get through for some guaranteed damage or whatever it may be. I like Skrelv. I think Skrelv can come in handy depending on what situation we're in, and it'll just give some of our creatures protection. The one creature I'd like to see Skrelv out with is Tyrannix Rex. Trample, Toxic 4, Ward 4, Haste, can't be counted. 8/8 for 7 with Toxic 4. So this is a great Freesis target. This is a great Exoskeleton target. This plus either of those two will just knock probably a single player out if it's not blocked or if it tramples through for enough. I love this card. It's very expensive, like the creature sitting next to it in this list. But I think we need a top end for something, and I think with the amount of tokens we're making, I feel like we're going to be able to pitch a few to an Ashnod's Altar, or to pitch a few to a Phyrexian Altar, or tap a few with Cryptolith to get Tyrannix Rex out. I think it and like Choirmaster are two like big creatures that are going to just net us a ton of value. Like same thing with Elishnorn. Like they're one of those ones that we want to target and get out. Same reason we want to get out Vorinclex. I wanted to try to fit as many Praetors as I could in here. Whenever we put one or more counters on a permanent player, twice that many of each of those kind of counters I put in that permanent player instead. Well, this just doubles the toxic of every creature we control. This is another one of those important cards we want to get out. And then it's a 6/6 with Trample and Haste itself. So again, another great target for Exoskeleton, another great target for Phyresis. I think I turned my best to kind of even out, not just having toxic, but also having great targets for those two to kind of help us end games that way. Slaughter Singer, probably the creature in the deck I'm least confident in. Toxic 2, so it's not bad on its own, a 2/2 with Toxic 2. Whenever another creature you control toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end turn. So this just pumps all of our mites by a flat 1 as long as they're attacking. I think that makes it worth its slot in the deck. Again, I'm not sure yet. I kind of gone back and forth on Slaughter Singer, but I don't mind it. If I don't find Slaughter Singer working out well enough, I think I might just toss in a bring Inspiring Leader or something that's just going to flat increase all of our tokens. If we find more often than not we just need a flat buff, well, then we could bring in something like Glorious Anthem or something like that. I doubt it as much. I think Slaughter Singer could do a good enough value on its own. It's just going to be a little bit more reliant on us setting up the tokens, unlike other ones of our creatures. And then Yawgmoth, Thran Physician, although he is not a Phyrexian, he is a Phyrexian in spirit. Protection from humans, pay 1 life, sack another creature, put a -1/-1 counter up to 1 target creature and draw a card, and then double black, discard a card, proliferate. So, proliferate for 2 black and discarding a card could end up coming into handy every now and then. The paying a life and sacking a creature to target creature with a -1/-1 counter and draw a card, I feel like just could come in handy. It's a way to respond to combos if need be. There's plenty of ways we can use Yawgmoth to just put down creatures. I had heavily considered Chatterfang for the deck as well, because I think Chatterfang just kind of sits alongside everything else we're trying to do. If you think about it, Chatterfang on the battlefield plus Vishgraz just automatically gets us 3 squirrels and 3 mites. And I feel like the squirrels would either just be good attackers or they would be great for Chatterfang's ability. So Chatterfang is something that could come in if I notice that Yawgmoth works really well, but I just don't get to see it enough. Maybe Chatterfang comes in as another way to kind of put another diversification on how the game kind of ends. I did have Vraska in the deck, the new one, for a little bit, and I liked just the straight 0 proliferate, but I figured there were cheaper ways to proliferate that fit our theme, and I would much rather keep that slot up for Grafted Exegol and Phresis. Oh, we didn't talk about Sword and Truth of Justice. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, it gets +1/+1 counter on it and then proliferate. So this is a way to just put a proliferate on dealing combat damage. This is great. Protection from white and from blue. Put it on a creature with trample. We're almost going to get guaranteed a proliferate trigger there. But my thought process was that there was more of these individual cards that I think are a little bit more important than Vraska, especially the tutors, the Sylvan Library, things like that, I think are just going to become more important for consistency, because I feel like that consistency is going to be the one thing that probably kills this deck in the long run. Is, can I get mana down quick enough? Can I set my board position up fast enough to take advantage of the things that I have and put the pressure through? Because I think the single most important thing is going to be locating one of my token doublers, getting it down, getting it online, and really making the deck kind of sing as we either blink the heck out of Vishgraz or just run our opponents over with trample/infect. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of this tokens approach to Toxic? I think I like this a little more than Ixal personally, just in the way that the deck functions. We get to add a few more cards from the set than probably Ixal would. We get to really take advantage of those tokens and use them to our advantage. And I think we get to, even if we find ourselves to be a little bit more combat oriented, we can bring in some more just flat anthem effects to really push ourselves through. So let me go what you guys think down in the comments. Let me know what you think of Vishgraz. Again, this is a deck that I'm very excited to build, and what I'll try to do is, if it works out well for me, or as I take my next update to the deck, maybe I'll do another video and we can talk about what I learned from the deck or how that works. If you've watched this far, thank you so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if there's any old decks that you'd like me to revisit. I've got a couple slated for revisiting, but not too much. I genuinely love Phyrexia, but I'll be 100% honest, there's not as many commanders as I expected I was going to want to brew, which, believe me, isn't a bad thing. I've got a list of a ton of old commanders that I would like to brew. If you want to see me brew anything, please put it down in the comments. I would love to brew the deck that you want to see me brew. Otherwise, I have a list of decks I want to brew. We're following for the next week or two. We're going to be doing 2 Phyrexia commanders, 1 older commander. That's going to be this week and the next week. And then I think we're probably, to be 100% honest, going to run out of most of the commanders from Phyrexia. Will be one that I want to cover. So we're just going to kind of start bouncing around. I've got some projects going on. I've got some things going on I'm working on. So we'll kind of lead those out there. And then for the guys that have watched really deep, in less than 4 weeks, my wife will be giving birth. And so when that happens, my Millzy Brews production will probably dip back down to 2 decks instead of 3. It's going to be a little bit harder to get some of the extra content that I do that get out. And so I am very excited about that, about being a dad and transitioning my life. And I will get back up to my normal production as soon as I can. But for the people that are really invested, I just want you to know that it's coming. It's something I'm really excited about, and I'm ready for my life to change. But in the same way, I love this channel, and I love making this content for you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.